podcast where we will explore the dark corners of our world, the weird, the creepy, and the strange. I'm your host, Eric Carrier. My co-host is Jessica Carrier. Thank you for joining us for a journey into the unknown. Let's get started with today's show. Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. This is the Prairieland Paranormal Podcast, and I'm your host, Eric Carrier. As always, I'm here with my wife and co-host, Jessica Carrier. This is episode 5. Jessica, what do we have in store for our listeners today?
Today we're going to be taking a journey to Decatur, Illinois, and discussing 2 regional haunted hotspots, the Avon and the Lincoln theaters. Both of these theaters were built in 1916, and both are reported to be haunted.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I'm excited about this episode. These locations are both regional and nationally known, and ghost hunting teams from all over the country have been coming and investigating them for years. And both have some great stories and some great history. Before we get started with today's show, we want to take a second and thank everyone who has been joining us on social media. If you're interested in engaging with us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, all of those accounts can be accessed through our website, which is www.prairielandparanormalpodcast.com. We also want to remind you that if you've had any experiences that you would like to share, that you can also submit those experiences through our website.
We want to make sharing experiences easy, so even if you're not comfortable with sharing your experiences as a guest on our podcast, we would still love to hear and share those experiences on our blog. Sharing stories is a way that we as humans connect, and we can certainly see that the world could use some connection right now. You can even submit show ideas or just say hi if you want to. Either way, we'd love to hear from you.
We also want to take a second and thank RJ Jenkins for the illustration of one-armed red that will be featured as the cover art for this episode. Thank you, RJ. As always, the art is fantastic.
It is.
Lastly, if you're enjoying the podcast, we would invite you to please consider sharing it with your friends and your family. And we would also invite you to leave a review on your favorite podcast player. Okay, that's enough plugging. Let's get started with today's show. Decatur sits directly in the middle of central Illinois and is home to not one, but 2 reportedly haunted theaters. The Avon and the Lincoln both sit in the heart of the downtown district, and together they offer a double feature of the bizarre.
The Avon Theater opened on November 28, 1916. It was elaborate and exquisitely decorated. In fact, it was one of the most expensively decorated movie picture houses in the entire country at that time, even rivaling the Twin. The decorations and artwork were all original pieces by a local artist named C.O. Knapp. It featured 7-foot-tall monuments on the outside posts and large statues of lions with lighted eyes on the inside. There is even a statue of a woman above the curtains holding a large wreath out towards the audience. And if that wasn't enough, the theater was circled entirely with busts of women's heads.
The decor was only part of what made the Avon special. The screen was the largest in the city, and workers spent hours whitewashing the wall to make the screen absolutely perfect. Everything, including the projector, the pipe organ, the orchestra, and the acoustics, were designed to give the audience as much of a flawless experience as possible. It wasn't surprising that the Avon quickly became known as the most beautiful theater in the Midwest. The Avon was also unique in that it was solely designed for moving pictures. At the time, it was considered to be a waste to build a theater for movies alone. Besides, movies were nothing more than a fad. Little did they know that in 2020, the Avon would still be thriving under its original purpose and design.
On its opening night, the audience was greeted by Dan Denon, Decatur's mayor, who stated that the theater was unquestionably the handsomest and largest in the state of Illinois. He also boasted that, thanks to new businesses like the Avon, Decatur would finally take its place in the ranks of real cities.
The Avon prospered for many years, but it would not hold on to its glory. The theater was extensively remodeled in the 1950s, taking on a mid-century modern decor and style. The Avon would never again see the elegance and the decadence of its early years. The theater saw sharp declines in business and revenue in the 1980s, and soon it was the last retro-style theater left in town. This was fueled by the development of new multiplex theaters which offered patrons more choices. In desperation, and as an effort to just keep the doors open, the theater converted to showing second-run movies in 1985. This was short-lived, and the Avon finally closed its doors for good in April 1986.
The theater remained empty for several years, and while there were attempts to resurrect it, they were all met with a general lack of enthusiasm from the community. There seemed to be no hope that the theater would ever open its doors again. That is, until 1999, when the theater underwent renovations and opened as an independent and art film theater. The Avon thrived under this new model as Decatur residents flowed back to the seats to experience alternative films and limited release films that would have otherwise never seen audiences.
It seems, however, that restoring the old building didn't just stir up years of old dust, but perhaps a ghost or two. So who is believed to be haunting the building? One of its previous owners, of course. The theater stayed with the original owners until it was bought by Gus Constanopelous and family in 1927. Gus loved the theater and worked in his second-story office in the building. The Constanopelous family sold the Avon in 1966 to a large theater chain. Legend has it that Gus loved the theater so much that he refused to leave his office even after the theater was bought out. While this part of the story is probably fable, it is told that the new owners had to throw everything out of Gus's office and onto the street just to get him to leave. This may explain why Gus is believed to still be haunting the Avon today. He simply loved the theater and refused to leave.
The Avon did not become officially known for its ghostly activity until the mid-1990s. This was when prospective proprietor Skip Houston started having strange experiences. The theater had been sitting unused and Skip was evaluating the Avon for different proposed downtown projects. He visited the theater on a dark and rainy afternoon in 1995 to grab some marquee letters. Even though the theater was purported to be haunted, he wasn't concerned and had no qualms about entering the rundown building even though there was no electricity. Armed with a flashlight and a couple of garbage bags to carry the letters, he entered the theater and found the letter room, which was on the upstairs level. There was a variety of letters from days gone by, and Skip spent several minutes sorting through these letters, using the flashlight as a guiding light. Not long into the search, Skip heard a noise in the hallway outside of the room. He investigated but found nothing there. A few minutes later, he heard what he thought were footsteps, but upon searching the hall, he again found nothing. Shaking it off, he went back to work, sorting and filling the bags with letters. Then, hearing the noise again, he quickly turned around to find a man standing in the doorway.
My first thought, he said, was that someone else was in the theater, perhaps a homeless person hiding out there. He was of medium height and slender build. His age appeared to be in his late 50s or early 60s. His hair was close-cropped, gray, and black. He was not transparent or wraith-like. He appeared solid. His face was nondescript, and he stared into the room. Not looking at me, just staring. I started to speak to him, and then he slowly turned and started down the hallway. Recovered from my surprise, I darted to the doorway to say something, but all that I saw was an empty hall. I grabbed the finished bag of letters and left the theater as fast as my legs would carry me.
The theater started undergoing renovations in 1998 in an effort to reopen it. Skip and his business partner Troy Taylor started giving haunted Decatur tours about this time and used the Avon as an investigation site on the tours. There was still no electricity in the building, and it was closed to the public due to the renovations. On this particular night, the outdoor events had been rained out, and the plan was to take the group to the Avon for an extended investigation to salvage the otherwise anticlimactic night. Weird things had happened before on these tours, but something happened that night that was more startling and strange than any other time. Perhaps it was the storm that night that added to the spooky ambience.
As Skip discussed the Avon's history and shared some of the haunted events with the group, he paused and asked if there were any questions. There was a hand raised, and someone asked about the name of the former owner, the so-called resident ghost. As soon as Skip said, Gus Constanopelous, someone in the crowd shouted and pointed in the direction of the theater balcony, where a figure stood near the balcony rail. There were at least 15 people in the tour group that night, who all reported seeing the shadowy figure. The group panicked, and people pushed and shoved each other in the dark to get out of the auditorium and into the lobby. Once in the lobby, the group rushed to the exits only to find them locked. It was absolute pandemonium. Skip was probably not surprised when his assistant quit that night and never came back.
This wasn't Skip's last encounter with Gus. One time, he was sitting in the auditorium talking to someone when he saw a strange flash of light. He didn't worry about it, and he wrote it off as an optical illusion until it was brought to his attention by the person he was talking to. The other person described the light as having an outline of a figure, which confirmed exactly what Skip had seen. So was this Gus? Perhaps. Today, the Avon is operational and thriving. There are still occasional reports of apparitions and other supernatural events. In recent times, there have been sightings of a woman in a blue dress and what appears to be a uniformed man in costume from the 1930s.
Another common report involves what has been called the phantom audience. The theater has received nearly a dozen reports of patrons spotting shadowy forms sitting in theater seats. These apparitions appeared to be watching whatever film is being shown. One patron reported seeing two distinct figures seated in the theater a short distance away from her.
I happened to glance forward and a little to my right during the movie, and I saw what looked like a young couple sitting in the seats, staring at the screen. They looked completely ordinary, but they were only there for a second. Then they were just gone.
All in all, nothing that haunts the Avon seems to be malicious, just spirits like Gus Constanopelous who love the theater and refuse to leave. Let's enjoy a short intermission before our next show.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
All right, let's get back to the show.
The Lincoln Theater is also located in downtown Decatur and resides on North Main Street in the downtown district. It was built in 1916, the same year as the Avon. The theater was built as a grand theater and was used for live performances and stage shows. The theater is a sprawling maze with a mezzanine, high balcony, basement, and subcellars. It would be hard for a building of this size and history not to come with a few ghosts.
The Lincoln Theater was constructed on land that already had a rich history of tragedy. The first permanent building on this site was the Priest Hotel, which was opened by W.S. Chrisley, but later completed and operated by Franklin Priest. The hotel was built on what was known as the Old Square in 1860. 20 years later, the hotel was taken over by Riley Deming, who changed the name to the New Deming. Only 12 years later, in 1892, the name was changed again to the Arcade Hotel by its new owner, Augustine Waite. Hotel ownership shifted again 8 years later with a remodel and an expansion. The new hotel's name was the Decatur and Arcade Hotel. Unfortunately, this revamp did not last long, as the hotel was destroyed by fire in 1904.
The town did not give up on this hotel, and it was rebuilt shortly afterwards, just to burn down again in 1915. This new tragedy not only destroyed the hotel, but claimed 2 lives and burned several of the surrounding structures. After examination, the cause of the fire was determined to be oily rags that were left near the hotel's boiler. A night watchman smelled the smoke and tried to contain the fire, but it was too late. The blaze quickly frenzied and destroyed everything in its path.
The 2 men whose lives were claimed by this tragic fire were William E. Graham and C.S. Guild. Graham was an engineer for the Decatur Bridge Company, and Guild was a traveling salesman from New York. Their bodies were found among the burnt ruins, but there were several others whose bodies were never found. The Lincoln Theater and a few other buildings were built on this property after this fire. The other buildings on this land were the Oddfellows Lodge and some smaller stores that were collectively given the name of Lincoln Square.
Knowing the history of the land, Clarence Waite, the new landowner, hired the architectural firm to design the buildings on this land to be fireproof. To make this happen, the firm did things like surround the theater in a thick 2-foot firewall. The building materials and furnishings were all made with materials that were reported to not only be fire-resistant, but impossible to burn. In fact, the architect made the outrageous claim that the entire block could burn down, but the theater would be left standing.
The theater was extremely popular, and popular performances of the day were regular attractions. Troy Taylor, a local author and paranormal investigator, gave an account of an impressive, if not miraculous, performance at the Lincoln Theater on his website, hauntedillinois.com. In this account, he states, "Although movies had largely replaced live entertainment at the Lincoln, there were still special performances booked there on a regular basis. It was during one of these performances that the fireproof claims of the theater were first tested. In September 1942, Harry Blackstone returned to perform at the theater. The auditorium was filled with about 1,000 school children when fire broke out in the Rambo drugstore located next door to the Lincoln Theater. Alerted to the danger of smoke entering the theater and the building catching on fire, Blackstone remained calm and jokingly told the audience that for his next trick, he was going to make them all disappear from the theater in 5 minutes. He then directed them to leave row by row, out of the alley doors and out of the fire escapes in the balcony. He promised the children that they were assisting him in a marvelous new illusion, which he would fully explain to them outside. After he had successfully cleared the theater and learned that the danger was past, Blackstone is said to have sobbed with relief from the stress of his heroic evacuation of the theater. Years later, in 1960, while a guest on the television program This Is Your Life, he stated this had been the greatest trick of his career.
The fire raged and burned for 4 hours. It consumed the drugstore and the nearby Cook Jewelers, but it did not damage the Lincoln. The fire burned so hot that the floor of the neighboring building collapsed into the basement. There was also damage to an adjoining flower shop and beauty parlor. Turns out the architect was right. The surrounding buildings burned, but the Lincoln prevailed. In 1960, while showing the film The Bramble Bush, the neighboring buildings adjacent to the Lincoln again caught fire. There was some slight damage to the Lincoln, which caused some restructuring, but all in all, the building remained architecturally sound.
The building changed hands several more times throughout the years, and by 1990, the building had been stripped, neglected, and had deteriorated badly. Thankfully, the Lincoln came to the attention of a restoration group who has put thousands of dollars and countless hours into restoring it. The restoration, while a slow process, allows the theater to continue to host shows to this day.
The Lincoln Theater has been known to be haunted since at least the 1930s. Much of the reported phenomena is typical to many purportedly haunted places and includes reports of cold spots, unexplained sounds, and footsteps.
However, there is at least one apparition purported to haunt the Lincoln. This apparition is known as One-Armed Red, and of course, Red comes with his own legend. As the story goes, Red was once a stagehand at the Lincoln, and he died a particularly gruesome death in the theater. Red, a shy, yet secretly aspiring actor, had bright auburn hair and dreamed of one day taking the stage. One night, during a performance, Red was working on the catwalk 75 feet above the stage when he slipped on the metal gridwork and fell. As he plummeted to the stage floor, he collided with the pin rail, a metal bar with sharp hooks. The story goes that when Red collided with the rail, his arm became snagged on a hook and was severed from his body. Red landed on the stage a bloody mess, his arm still dangling above. Red died there on the stage a few moments later.
While certainly a shocking story, fortunately, there is relatively little truth to it. While Red did exist and did die at the Lincoln, the truth is not nearly as dramatic as the legend. The truth is, Red really was a stagehand who worked at the Lincoln Theater during the late 1920s. But Red didn't lose his arm in a grotesque accident. Red was a veteran of World War I, and he lost his arm in military service. When he returned home after the war, he took a job at the Lincoln. Red was reported to be a likable man, particularly because he could do more with one arm than many of the other men could do with two. He loved his job and was a devoted employee. He was known among staff as the stagehand who never left the theater.
While Red did not die a horrible death falling from the catwalk, he did die at the theater. His death was actually quite peaceful. One afternoon in 1927, Red simply laid down for a nap after lunch and never woke up. Red left such an impression that when ghostly reports started in the 1930s, everyone just deduced it was him. The story naturally swelled from there into the morbid tale everyone knows today.
Red isn't the only resident ghost. There are also reports of a woman in a long old-fashioned dress. Given the historical tragedies and the unknown number of deaths at the property, there are likely several more. The Lincoln never disappoints and is reported to be a fantastic place to investigate classic types of haunting phenomenon. It's such an active location that the American Ghost Society holds, at least in years past, an annual conference there, and the Ghost Research Society holds after-hours events investigating the property after the conference. The classic haunting phenomenon that is prevalent at the Lincoln Theater includes shadow figures, unusual sounds, seats raising and lowering, footsteps, whispering, and disembodied voices. Perhaps it is the theater's acoustics that make the phenomenon so prevalent and easy to catch in this location. Much of the activity seems to occur around the spiral staircase, which is considered the most haunted place in the theater.
Troy Taylor, a local paranormal investigator, author, and the president of the American Ghost Society, reported this well-documented experience at the Lincoln Theater in 1995. I was in the theater one evening in October 1995 with a reporter and a cameraman from a local television station. They had contacted me about haunted places in Central Illinois for a news special, and one of the places that I took them was the Lincoln Theater. After an interview about the hauntings, I decided to join the cameraman, Robert, for a trip up the spiral staircase. He took his camera along, hoping to film the theater stage from this vantage point. It was a good thing that he brought it, because we would have had no other source of light to make the trip up there with. We rounded the staircase and then reached the top. We looked around the small and confined space for several minutes, exploring a small room that leads to the theater air ducts. Other than this dusty chamber, there is not much else to see up there. We stood talking for a few moments, and then what happened next was enough to convince even a skeptic like Robert that there may be more to the Lincoln Theater than first meets the eye. It seemed innocent enough at first. We had climbed the spiral staircase and left the reporter down on the stage by herself. We weren't surprised to soon hear the sound of her footsteps as she followed us up the stairs. Her hard-soled shoes made a distinctive sound as they echoed on the metal footsteps. Realizing that we had the only portable light and the staircase was quite dark, Robert leaned over the rail with the camera so that the reporter would have some light to see by. Just as he did this, from out on the stage, we heard the sound of a voice calling out to us. We looked and saw the reporter standing in the middle of the stage, dozens of feet from the base of the steps, and much too far away to have been climbing the staircase just moments before. We suddenly realized that the footsteps on the staircase had not belonged to the reporter. So who was climbing the staircase? We didn't know, but when the sounds finally stopped, we didn't stay up there long enough to find out. So, Jessica, those are the stories of the Avon and the Lincoln theaters. What do you think about that?
We've actually been to the Avon Theater. We didn't have any ghostly experiences.
Well, we weren't actually there to have ghostly experiences. I think we were there to watch a Star Wars movie.
Yeah, it was a lot more fun than being scared from ghosts.
It's kind of neat sitting in the theater knowing about its history and knowing that there's at least a possibility that you could get a little bit of extra for your money.
I also think it's wonderful that in such a small area you can have two historical theaters.
Yeah, these theaters are literally only like 2 blocks apart from each other. We've never actually had a chance to go to the Lincoln Theater because it's primarily under renovation right now, and they don't hold a lot of events there currently. I think it's awesome, though, that even when you take the paranormal history away, that these sites have some really fantastic history and stories. So, if you're in the Decatur area and interested in a double feature of the unusual, perhaps check out the Avon and the Lincoln theaters. You can sit in the theaters in the dark, alone, and decide for yourself if they are, as they profess, haunted. All right, folks, that's the end of this episode. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you listening. If you have enjoyed the show, please consider subscribing. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. And remember, if you've had a paranormal experience that you would like to share, please email us at prairielandparanormalpodcast@gmail.com or visit our website at prairielandparanormalpodcast.com. So until next time, remember, don't be normal when you can be paranormal.